Great. Welcome tonight to our session on heating and cooling with electric heat pumps. I'm Ellen Tone, a participant in Energize Wayland and also co-chair of Wayland's Energy and Climate Committee. This event is being sponsored by Energize Wayland and along with other communities that participate with Energize Wayland, an organization called Mass Energize. So that would be a program in Harvard, Framingham, Boxborough, Natick, and the Jewish Climate Action Network. So you're here because you're one of those communities or somehow you heard about it from a friend. In any case, we're delighted to have all 36 of us here tonight. I want to thank Great Sky Solar, which is a solar installer that has been supporting Energize Wayland for their financial support that allows us to do things like that. And we are all about in Energize Wayland engaging individuals to take action on climate. And that's also true for all of the groups I mentioned, the Jewish Climate Action Network and all your other communities. And we all want to do that and know what everyone's doing because it's important to be vocal and visible that we are taking climate action. There's a fascinating new study out that says while about 60 some odd, 2/3 of Americans believe climate change is real, believe it's impacting someone they know, most people think only 30% of people think climate change is an issue, and only about 30% of people believe that we should take actions on solutions. The real number is closer to 60, so we don't recognize that we all care about it and that more of us want to do something about it than don't. So there's sort of a silent majority, so it's up to us to no longer be a silent majority, but to be a vocal majority, take actions and talk about it. So the website energizewayland.org for folks in Wayland is a place for you to tell us what you've done or put something on your to-do list. And at the very end, I'll show you the site. And all of these communities in Harvard, Framingham, Boxborough, Natick, and Jewish Climate Action Network have a similar tool. So tonight we're here to hear about heat pumps, most for heating and cooling, but Steve will also mention hot water heaters. And Steve Bright, our wonderful speaker, who's a good friend involved in Energize Wayland, also works member of our congregation Bethel and the Jewish Climate Action Network, is an expert in this field, so you're in for a treat if you haven't heard from Steve. And I'll talk about the amazing new federal incentives from the IRA bill that just passed. Just to whet your appetite, it's tax credits up to $2,000 to supplement the state incentives. I've personally benefited from Steve's coaching. We put in a heat pump, Steve, probably a couple of years ago, and Steve helped us navigate all the quotes we got. And just 2 months ago, we replaced when our hot water heater died, we went to a heat pump hot water heater as part of our decarbonization. So it's all doable. And we in Wayland and other places have people and resources to help you make those great choices. So let me then hand it over to Steve, who will run the show. And on Q&A, Steve, I'll be monitoring the chat all along and can help you in answering Q&A. But over to Steve.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Hi, everybody. We want to talk about green heating and cooling. I participate both in an Energize Wayland and an organization called Heat Smart Alliance, which advocates for heat pump adoption in Massachusetts, and we're all volunteers on both of those organizations. So why heat pumps? Home heating and cooling really matters in terms of energy use. In New England, overall energy use, about 30% is from residential energy use. And then within residential, about 60% is for heating and cooling, another 17% for hot water, 2% for clothes drying. So when you look at those four uses combined, about 80% of home energy needs can be handled by heat pumps. Different kinds of heat pumps for each of those three applications, but they are nonetheless heat pumps. So the overall path to decarbonizing your home, the first step is to weatherize, to insulate it and air seal it as well as possible. And Mass Save offers a lot of benefits for Wayland residents and residents in other communities that are served by one of the investor-owned utilities such as Eversource or National Grid. Some of the towns that are served by municipal light plants also offer benefits that are comparable to mass save. So you want to weatherize the home. You want to electrify as much as possible, and that certainly includes the heating and cooling and hot water heating, provided you do the water heating with a heat pump. And then the third step is to shift to renewable energy sources, ideally solar panels on your home. But if your home isn't suitable for solar, you can still green your electricity supply by purchasing electricity from renewable sources. And soon in Wayland, we're going to have community choice aggregation with 100% green option. So we can look forward to that in the next, Ellen, when is that coming, in the next year or two? Or
We'll be submitting our plan to the state this fall. I think it'll be at least a year, Steve.
Okay.
At least a year and a half.
All right. All right. So what's a heat pump? Very simply, it's a device that moves heat or thermal energy from a cooler place to a warmer place. And you already have a bunch of heat pumps in your home, even if you're not using it for heating and cooling or water heating. Your refrigerator, your dehumidifier, your air conditioners are heat pumps. They fit the definition in the first line. They just do it for a different reason. And so heat pumps are available for home heating, and all heat pumps that are used for home heating also provide cooling. Very important benefit if you don't already have AC. For water heating, even for clothes drying and pool heating. And the most common types of heat pumps take energy from the outdoor air. For each unit of, roughly speaking, for each unit of electricity or electrical energy that goes in, they take 2 additional units of energy from the outdoor air and deliver 3 units to the home. So it's actually 300 in the range of 250 to 350% efficiency, if you want to think about it that way. The benefits in Massachusetts home: superior year-round comfort. Summer and you get heating and cooling, an important point. And the heat pumps that are suitable for our cold climate are variable speed. They're driven, they are sometimes referred to as inverter driven. So they modulate very closely around a set temperature, as opposed to going hard on and off like conventional heating systems. So that's part of the contribution to the comfort. They reduce greenhouse gas emissions substantially, and we'll quantify that in a minute. There are energy cost savings versus modest savings versus fuel oil, considerable savings versus propane, and versus electric resistance heat or baseboards, such as was the case in some homes. It's sort of a no-brainer that the heat pump's going to save energy. And finally, if you actually remove the fossil system from your home, there's no risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, or in the case of gas explosions, such as we've had in the greater Boston area in recent years. So how much emissions reduction? Well, this chart shows for a typical 2,000 square foot home, based on our projection of the standard electricity from the Massachusetts grid, which is mandated to get greener over the next 20 years. So we factored that into the analysis, and anything you install, if you install a heat pump today, it should certainly still be in service in 2040. So you have to look at it over the life of the system. And we're looking in all cases at high efficiency new equipment, but you can see with fuel oil, roughly 5 tons of emissions, a bit lower with propane. Baseboard electric and natural gas are comparable in terms of GHG emissions, but the air source heat pump is about 30% of the best fossil options. A ground source heat pump is even better. But guess what? If you power this system with green electricity from renewable sources, the emissions from the heat pump are 0. So this is a big win, and given that the heat pumps account for such a large percentage of the home's energy use, this is one of the most impactful things you can do to reduce your home's carbon footprint. So you may be wondering, there are a bunch of different kinds of heat pumps for homes. One of my mantras is that every home is unique. The existing homes, there are very few homes in this area that haven't had at least one renovation. So you find all kinds of combinations of strange heating situations. So that said, the most common type, and a lot of what makes sense for your home may depend on what the existing heat distribution type is. So you may have a hydronic system. In the hydronic system, you have baseboards or maybe radiators. They could be steam or hot water radiators. And so in the basement, you have something called a boiler. There's no big ducts coming out of this. That's I would say roughly 50% of the homes in Wayland, at least in the area, generally have hydronic heating systems. Or you may have a forced air system that's called a furnace instead of a boiler, and you've got ducting, large ducts coming into and leaving that. There's usually an intake duct going into the bottom of the furnace, and the hot air is coming out the top. And if you have air conditioning, you have something called a coil sitting on top of your furnace if you have central air conditioning, and the heat is supplied to the home via vents. So let me just do I can't actually see the gallery, but perhaps Ellen, you can take a look at the gallery. I'm going to ask everybody who has a hydronic system or thinks they do, raise your hand. And hopefully Ellen you can give me a sense of what the balance is. Now, everybody who has forced air, raise your hand. And everyone who doesn't know, raise your hand. All right, what does it look like, Ellen? You got to unmute. All right, I'm seeing some sign language. All right, we'll keep going then. All right, so if you have a hydronic system, it's most likely the easiest way to add a heat pump to your home are what are called ductless mini splits. Originally, they were single zone, 1 unit outdoors, 1 unit indoors, the most common indoor unit being a wall unit. So I'm sure many of you have seen these. And then more recently, there were multi-zone mini split systems. And they have various kinds of indoor units. They're wall units, ceiling cassettes. I took a question at the beginning about ceiling cassettes versus wall units. There are floor units, and there are also what are called compact ducted systems that may make sense for serving both a couple bedrooms or a bedroom and a bathroom, that sort of thing. And not shown here, there are also fully ducted systems, so these are very flexible to install. And you can keep the hydronic system in place as a backup or emergencies. And that often makes sense to keep it there so that you have a redundancy in heating systems. There are also, if you have hydronic air-to-water heat pumps, they use the hydronic distribution, but there are quite a few cautions there because they put out water at a lower temperature than a conventional boiler, so you may need to modify the baseboards or radiators. They'd be a great match for radiant flooring. And then you can't get air conditioning without also having some units that look much like the wall units. So the air-to-water heat pumps are rarely used in Massachusetts. There are only about 4 installers who do them, and at least based on one of our residents' survey, the costs are 20 to 30% higher than these ductless mini split systems. If you have forced air distribution, then the most likely choice is what's called a central air source heat pump. You'll have an outdoor unit that looks very much like a central air conditioner, if not identical to it. You can't tell the difference visually often. And that could be connected to a coil that's sitting on top of the furnace. That would be a partial electrification option, or it could be connected to something called an air handler, which we see on the right here, and that would be for complete electrification. In both cases, you can get a large percentage of the heat from the heat pump, and in this case, you might only rely on the fossil system for backup or routinely in colder weather. There are also ground source heat pumps, so they would replace either one of these units here indoors, and the ground source gets the below about 5 feet below ground level. The ground stays at 50 degrees or higher year round, so they extract heat from the ground in the winter, and in the summer they dump heat into the cool ground. So they use that. They also provide cooling and heating, and all you have is this unit indoors. So the caution with both of these, any kind of system that's using the existing ducting, is that ducting has to be adequately sized. It should be insulated and well sealed. So ground source versus air source heat pump, there are better incentives, bigger incentives for the ground source systems. They are more efficient, 50 to 70% higher efficiency, which means you have lower energy costs, lower emissions. There's nothing visible outdoors, nothing above ground. All you have is this unit indoors, and it's completely factory packaged in terms of the refrigerant. There are no refrigerant loops that could possibly leak at some time in the future, and the refrigerant that used today is better than what we used to do, but it's still a fairly bad greenhouse gas if it escapes from the system. Air source heat pumps tend to be lower first cost. You don't have to disturb the landscaping. There is quite a bit of landscaping disturbance usually with installing the wells for the ground source heat systems. You need some space outdoors for this outdoor unit, and there are more ductless options, as we've already talked about. So lots of ways to sort of solve problems and get the heat into the space. There is some prospect that in the future, ground source systems with ductless indoor units will be available. All right, so I've been remiss in not mentioning heat pump options for domestic hot water. These are called heat pump water heaters or hybrid water heaters because they generally have the heat pump as well as electric resistance as a backup to recover when there's been a lot of water usage. These can save 60% in energy and carbon emissions over a conventional electric water heater, and so there's pretty fast payback. And you don't need a HVAC installer. Plumbers will install these water heaters, and more plumbers are becoming familiar with them. The installation is really very similar to installing a conventional electric water heater. So another question on your mind might be, how much will it cost? And so in terms, there are two aspects, of course. One is the first cost, but I'll speak here to the annual energy cost. And again, here we're looking at a cost for a typical 2,000 square foot home. This is based on electricity rates from Eversource, their standard rate last year. And so, of course, that rate is, it's actually not much more right now, but it's expected to go up quite a bit in December. On the other hand, we also know that natural gas and fuel oil prices have gone up quite a bit since the last heating season. So it's based on average cost. What I can say is that I expect this comparison will move, the bars will move around a little because prices are quite volatile, but over the long term, the relative costs should be similar. So you can see baseboard electric is by far the most expensive way to heat, followed by propane, fuel oil. The air source heat pump is should be a little less expensive than fuel oil. Unfortunately, natural gas as of last winter was still quite inexpensive, and again, these relative numbers will move around, but I think over time that it'll settle in roughly this comparison. So natural gas, then you have to think a little bit about what you're doing in terms of operating cost. It is possible to use the air source heat pump for partial electrification, let's say at warmer temperatures, and then switch to natural gas at colder temperatures and not have a lot of extra cost from using the heat pump. All right, financial incentives for first cost. There's, of course, the Mass Save program, which got a lot better this year. If you do a whole home ground source heat pump installation, there's a fixed amount of $15,000 toward that installation. For a whole home air source heat pump, $10,000. And if you do a partial home air source heat pump, $1,250 per ton. And to give you some idea, a typical home in Wayland will need 3 to 5 tons. So you can multiply this number by 3 to 5 to see what the rebate is. You might be looking at rebates in the range of $4,000 to $6,000 for the partial home. There's also something that's really attractive, a $25,000 heat loan from Mass Save, or sponsored by Mass Save, 0% for 7 years, which is a great deal given the current inflation rate. And you can now fold, sometimes you need to upgrade the electric panel when you change to a heat pump. That can be part of what's covered by this heat loan. And there are additional benefits for those at moderate income and income eligible folks who qualify. In this venue, I won't have time to go into all those details. All of this is available on the Mass Save website. There are also various rules that affect each of these. I would say the main one is that if you're contact installers now, you want to make sure that they're on the Mass Save heat pump installer network. Only installers who are in Mass Save's heat pump installer network, installations by those installers are required to qualify for these rebates. There's also the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, and there are tax credits. There's for ground source heat pump, it was 22% for this year prior to the IRA being passed. It's now gone back to 30%, which is great. There's a $2,000 credit for air source heat pumps that'll start sometime in 2023. The timing is not yet determined as far as I know. There's also a $2,000 tax credit for heat pump water heaters that will start in 2023. And there may be income-based rebates in the ranges that are shown here for air source heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. I want to caution that a lot of this is preliminary. It's not clear how these rebates will be administered in Massachusetts, and the state will have some discretion about that. There is a website that Ellen mentioned earlier called rewiringamerica.org that has a calculator, but I would not take the amounts like these to the bank just yet, because again, from information I have from people who are I consider knowledgeable, say this is all still up in the air. So
I just put that link in the chat, Steve, to that calculator.
all right, thank you. All right, so when you're looking at considering this a heat pump, you want to look at the first cost difference, the heat pump versus conventional equipment, including both the heating and cooling equipment that you might need to replace. You need to factor in the incentives that are available, and you might consider if you're thinking about it, assigning a price to carbon emissions. If you're saving 3 or 4 tons a year, that has a value. Experts generally peg the value around $50 to as much as $300 per ton of savings. So there's some value from that. There's some evidence that installing a heat pump could increase your home resale value. And you have to put value on the comfort improvements. If you don't have air conditioning now and you're getting air conditioning, that's obviously going to have impact on your resale value and value a value to you that is worth something. And again, future energy costs, we don't have a crystal ball, so there's certainly uncertainty there. So your action plan, what to do, because this is a considerable cost. You're looking at thousands of dollars of cost, sometimes tens of thousands or multiple tens of thousands, depending on the home. It makes the most sense financially to do this when your existing equipment is aging, which would be over 15 years old for heating and cooling equipment, over 7 to 10 years old for an electric resistance water heater. And so what you want to do there is plan ahead when your system is, your system is old. Don't wait for it to fail. And then you're in an urgent situation. It can take weeks and months to get quotes from multiple installers and then think through what you want to do. So this isn't something you want to be doing over a weekend when it's 20 degrees outside and you need heat in the home. If your home doesn't have AC yet, then this is a great way to add it. You shouldn't be thinking about just adding an air conditioner. You should be adding a heat pump. And the extra cost of doing a heat pump over doing an air conditioner is really quite small. There's so much cost associated with the installation of the heat pump and other factors that the equipment cost is just slightly higher with a good heat pump than with an efficient air conditioner. So you always never want to just do the air conditioning at this point. And finally, if you're planning an addition or a renovation or a new home, I really encourage you to think about it getting 100% of the heat for that added space or space you're renovating from a heat pump. Why not? It's feasible at this point. So how do you get started? On the Heat Smart Alliance website, we have a resources page with links to some of our favorite resources. So it's a one-stop place where you can get links to some of the things like the Mass Clean Energy Center has some great information for consumers. Neat.org has information that's all linked from our website. You'll want to get a free Mass Save Home Energy Assessment if you hadn't had one in the last 3 years. They are now, in the past, there was a lot of time spent on replacing bulbs with LED bulbs. They're no longer doing that. They have to focus on weatherizing the home. And so a lot of homes can benefit still from the Mass Save treatment. You also want to, and then we have volunteer heating coaches, at least in Wayland. We have 5 active coaches now, not counting myself. And you can find them, request one through our EnergizeWayland.org website. I'm going to turn off my screen share in a moment and ask the coaches to identify themselves. And then, once you've gotten prepared, then you want to call in HVAC installers and get some quotes. And what I've found is you'll learn from each installer. They'll all have slightly different take on your situation. And again, your home is unique. So it's good to get, I would say, at least 3 quotes, and you'll get a range of equipment offered and price, and factor in the installer's reputation and cost and the equipment offered when you're making a decision. So we have 2 testimonials from our Wayland neighbors about their experience. But before I do that, I'm going to stop the share briefly so I can see faces. And so I think we have here some of our coaches. Ina, okay, there's Ina. Ina's sort of coordinating the request to the Wayland coaches. Thanks, Ina. And then we have
hi, everybody.
Mike Pinot is on. And so all these coaches I did some training with them back in June and July, and they're starting to coach people. So I encourage Wayland residents to request coaches for some other community. We have Ann Harris here, and Ann's doing coaching, and let's see who else. All right, there's Ann. And I know if I missed anybody who's on the call, or
I thought I saw Michael, but
yeah, I mentioned
sure
him.
anyway. Yeah.
And we have Paul Dale doing
Paul
coaching.
is here. Yeah.
All right. great. Maybe you can focus on Paul, Ellen. And
Find him. Where is
Oh,
Paul?
Paul
I don't think,
Dale.
is he on the call though? I don't think he's on.
No,
uh,
he's not on a call right now.
Yeah, that's what I can't highlight him
uh,
on the call.
all right, and then for Congregation Bethel members, I'm the coach for Congregation Bethel members. If you're not in Wayland or a member of Congregation in Bethel, then I encourage you to go to the Heat Smart Alliance website. We don't currently show which communities we have. I think we have coaches in some communities. We'll let you know if we don't have a coach in the community. We probably can't help you right now because our coaches are busy coaching people in the communities where where they live. All right, so let me just wrap this up. Just introduce our neighbor testimonials. Let's see. Let's start with Courtney Connery. Courtney, okay, I'm just going to show a picture of your home. Let's see.
Hello, everybody.
All right, here's Courtney's home. When I first talked to Courtney, it was a ranch, and it's now a lot nicer looking and bigger, Courtney, as a result of an addition. But yeah, why don't you tell us your story?
Sure. So thank you. Fortunately, as Steve recommended, we were doing our homework pretty early on. The house, when we bought our house, it was a hydronic system. So we had a boiler in the basement that was from the 1950s, as old as the house. So we knew it was a bit of a dinosaur, and so it would eventually have to be replaced. So sort of over the course of time, I started having HVAC companies come out and give us estimates. Initially, my main issue is that I want to add central air. And to my surprise, everyone was recommending that we do heat pumps instead of putting in a central air system. So the good news is that I had done the legwork. I had met with several HVAC companies. When they started pushing us towards heat pumps, I started doing some research. I found Steve. He met with my husband and I virtually, and was able to provide us with some really great information. So we had done our homework, because then probably about almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, our oil tank sprung a leak. And so suddenly everything became a crisis. But fortunately, I had, I think, at least 3, maybe more quotes in hand already. So we already knew that we wanted to move to heating and cooling our home with heat pumps. We always sort of thought we would keep the oil backup for heat, but when we were forced with the decision to buy a new oil tank, we decided not to buy a new oil tank, and we heat and cool our home completely with 8 different mini splits. You can see one behind me here. We have 2 of the multi-zone units that you saw in the picture. It looks kind of like a double stack. We have 1 on each side of our house, and we have 4 running off each of those. So at the time that sort of our oil tank sprung a leak and we had to do all this, and it was kind of a crisis, we did have to upgrade our electrical panel at the same time, and it all had to happen like immediately, because this was in March and it was still cold. And fortunately, we moved to the front of the line because we were a family without heat and without hot water. So that moved us straight to the front of the line. So the good news is we had our quotes in hand. We had some companies we had been thinking of. We ended up going with a company that's rather large because we needed so much work done in a very short amount of time. So I needed a company that was sort of going to be one-stop shop and have the plumbers, the electricians, and the team that could come in and do the heat pumps. And so they were at our house, and all that work was done in 5 working days. They started on a Monday. It was all done by Friday, which was great. I don't know if I would have gone with that company if I had had my leisure time to make a choice. In the end, we were very happy with them. It all worked out. So it was great. And so now we started with our heat pumps in March. So we've had them now for about a year and a half. So we've had a couple of summers, and we've had 1 full winter. And last winter, it got really, really cold for a while, as I'm sure most of you will remember. So I was a little nervous. I spent a lot of time sort of Googling because I think they're good down to -16 degrees. Steve, you can correct me if that's wrong, but around there, somewhere in the teens, negative teens. So my husband and I were Googling sort of to see what the record lows had been in the Boston area for like the past. We went back as far as they were keeping track of the temperatures. And so I think that had only happened once or twice. So we figured we were good. We switched over. As I said, we do all of our heat and cooling through that. We are saving money on, it's definitely a cheaper way to heat our house. Probably, I don't know an exact figure. I would say it's probably costs us. It's the other thing that's hard is that we now have air conditioning, which we didn't before. So it's hard to say, but I would say if you just looked at a comparison of what we were paying in oil and what we're paying in our electric bill now, which includes our lights and our washer and dryer, and we have 2 children. And so all of that, we're still less for all of our electrical bill is still less than what our total oil bill was. And our plan is we did a renovation, as you saw in the picture. We knew that was going to happen when all of this happened. We sort of planned that we would do the heat pumps at the same time as the renovation, but we sort of had to do it reverse because of the oil tank failing. And so we worked with our installer to plan. We knew what the plan was going to be. So we made sure there was enough room in our units to add. We ended up only having to really add 1 additional heat pump. But we sized some of the other ones differently based on what we knew the finished square footage of the rooms they were going to be in was going to be ultimately. We also still have a little bit of space on our heat pumps to add in the future because we may do another addition. And so we wanted to make sure we had that flexibility if we wanted to finish additional space in the basement. We do have a unit in the basement and it keeps the basement very nice and toasty. I would say that our expectations have completely been exceeded with how much we love the units. Our house used to have cold spots and some bedrooms were really hot at night. And so it was very hard, but now both kids have like their own thermostat in their room. So every room can be a different temperature, which is really nice for people's sleeping habits. We can kind of I'm sitting in our mudroom now. We can this is out on the end of the house and we can kind of keep this room a lot cooler. We're not turning the heat off per se, but I don't have to keep it as warm as I would sort of our living spaces. So the flexibility to completely change it. And we are shocked at how quickly they warm the rooms up. And I don't think we rarely have the thermostat set above 70 because they pump out so much heat. And now with all of our new insulation, we've been totally thrilled. They cool really great, but the only time we ever went over 70 degrees was when this winter, whenever that was, when it was bitter cold there for quite a while. And the only thing I noticed then in the extreme cold is that the outdoor units, you could hear them a little bit from inside, you could hear them outside working, but we never had any issues and they continued to push out heat and we stayed nice and warm and it all worked out.
Great, thanks, Connor, Courtney. And
Sure.
All right, our other testimonial is from Gottfried Seringer. I'll just put up a image of your house, Gottfried.
Thank you, and
Here's
good evening,
Gottfried's
everybody.
house. And Gottfried has gone with a central air source heat pump to Bosch units. So Gottfried, I'll tell us your story.
Sure. So I got in touch, was it a couple of years ago by now, with Steve back then, as my old boiler was sort of on its last legs, was probably at least 25 years ago, sort of predated my purchase of the house. We've lived here for about 20 years now, actually right around the corner from Courtney. I see a house every day when I go on a walk. So I watched the progression of your addition. Very nice outcome. Anyway, so we sort of had an eye on our boiler because it needed some replacement at some point, but also just didn't want to do a one-for-one switch out of the old sort of water-based boiler. At the same time, it was also for hot water. We had some baseboard heat. We have some radiant heat actually in part of the house. So it wasn't quite as easy to just sort of rip it out from a heating perspective. We did also have from an earlier addition central air, already all the ductwork in the house. That central air system was about 20 years old. So while it was still okay-ish working, we knew it sooner or later would have to be replaced. So we decided to do sort of two things in one by number one, yes, fixing our old oil-based boiler, getting a new one there. And I wish the heat pump hot water would have been a little further along at the time, and maybe we could have avoided that altogether. But then also replaced our existing air conditioning with those Bosch heat pumps you saw to do both cooling and heating. And actually, Steve very much helped sort of me understand how this can work together and how the heat pump automatically switches over to oil, or oil switches automatically over to heat at a certain temperature. Initially, we had it set sort of by default from the installer to 35 degrees at that point. When it's warmer than 35 degrees, the heat pump heats the house, very similar to how Courtney described it. It's very comfortable heat. And as we know, we have a lot of time during the year, just like now, and in the spring where it's actually, 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and so forth, where you want some heat, but you don't need it blasting all the time. So that does a job for those times. And then when it's below 35 degrees, it switches over to the oil-based boiler that uses the old heating system that we had in the house. We actually started to experiment after a while to actually move that down. I now have it set to 30, and I'm actually thinking it might be a little more aggressive this year and get it even further down. Especially because I'm in the process of installing PV solar to really cover most of my electric needs. And that way it will be even cheaper to run it through that. And I probably can try to push the envelope there. I haven't really heard about an official limit there, except the electricity usage will go up, the colder it will be. So I'll be testing out in terms of how far I can push it. Well, I think cost-wise, it's probably been about a wash from a daily kind of monthly usage perspective. What I save in oil, and I do save, I think about 30–40% in oil. I'll pay in electricity more, but it's not. Initially, I was a little worried, it's going to be really expensive electricity-wise, but it really hasn't. And in fact, actually, the air conditioning, I think, in the summer, just because it's this newer system, is cheaper than it was before. And I think the air quality is better for the air conditioning compared to the old air conditioning. It doesn't blast as much. It's very quiet. It's very quiet airflow that we have there, and very comfortable both for cooling and heating. So I think that sort of summarized my story. Maybe one add to Courtney. I think we might have used the same installer, a big company, did everything. The process was about a week, indeed. Similarly, there was little tweaks here and there. They had to come back a couple of times, but they did come back, and we got it all done. So overall, with the quality of the work, quite happy, and sort of the ultimate outcome as well.
All right. Steve, I am seeing the chat, so there's a question that kind of keeps coming up. Can I toss it out to you?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so there's a question that sort of, there's two questions, but they really go together. So, in your experience, do most people, if they have oil or gas, keep the backup, or are most people able to do what Courtney did and sort of go fully electric? And related to that question is questions people saying, well, if I'm going fully electric, what happens when the power goes out? Do I lose all my heat? Which, even with gas, when the power goes out, you lose your heat. So, can you, I think those questions kind of could be nested, Steve.
Sure. Most of the people I've coached and that we coach end up keeping the fossil systems, but it's changing because the mass save rebates have changed so dramatically this year. Prior to this year, the rebate, if you went whole home heat pump, was not as attractive. And one of the things that's not immediately clear from the mass save program is that it does not require you to, when you go whole home, you are allowed to keep the existing fossil system. And the way they state it is you can use it in emergencies. Emergency is not well defined, but it would be understood to be either a failure of the heat pump system, which is frankly less likely than for any fossil system, or extremely cold days where you need where the heat pump needs some help. So when it makes sense to keep the fossil system in place, you should do it. The exceptions are like Courtney's situation where she was looking at some additional cost to keep the fossil system. And in that case, I would say it made sense to do what she did, but if you have an existing hydronic system that's working, and it can be, even if it's not that efficient, you're only going to use it occasionally, sure, keep it in place. But you should have it maintained yearly to be sure that it's there when you need it. So there's some cost to keeping the fossil system, but I think that having that backup, especially for super cold times, is not a bad idea. And again, most people I find do have some kind of backup, but where it makes sense, you can go 100% heat pump.
Steve, on the
The other,
power going in.
the point about emergency use. So while it's true that the fossil systems also require electricity to provide heat, they require a lot less electricity than a heat pump. And so if you had one of these portable generators, the portable generator might be able to keep the fossil system going, but it wouldn't be enough electricity to keep a heat pump going for a long period. So, again, the backup, if you're relying 100% on a heat pump, you don't have a fossil backup, you might want to have an emergency generator there if that's a concern to you. One of the things I see on the horizon is that many of us will have electric cars, and the electric cars will be able to serve as a backup for a home, and it may keep the heat pump running for a few hours, but probably not for days if you had a multi-day outage, which hasn't been unknown, at least in Wayland, in my time in Wayland, although less frequent than they used to be.
Steve, I have a question here from Tom, who says, like Courtney, we during the winter let our heat pump run no matter how cold it gets, with no transfer to our old fossil hydronic system. How cold can we go with just the heat pump? I know the answer to that is it depends what kind of heat pump you have.
Well, it's more, the heat pumps, common, the Asian mini split ductless systems, they typically have constant output in terms of heat down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And below 5 degrees, the output starts to drop off, but they will operate down to, as Courtney said, down to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't recall that we've ever had that in Wayland. Understand that even the design, in Wayland, maybe 1% of the year is less than 8 degrees on a typical year. So if we did encounter those extremely cold temperatures, it might be just for a few hours at night. And so the home would, well-insulated home will hold its heat. Maybe the temperature drops a couple degrees and it's a little bit cooler, but you're not going to freeze in the home. And if your backup fuel is propane or oil, then you want to run the heat pump as much as possible. In fact, what Gottfried Seringer was saying, where he has this crossover, that was the way that many installers set up the heat pumps 2-3 years ago. But my advice to Gottfried now would be to you can actually have an overlap between the heat pump and the fossil system, and you should set the lower limit down to 10 degrees for that Bosch heat pump and let the Bosch heat pump provide as much heat as possible. Maybe it can start to kick in at 30 degrees, but the reality is it probably won't start. Your fossil system won't kick in until 20 degrees. You want actually a wider range. It's a different strategy for swap over, and that's some of what I've learned over the last couple of years. And
I'll give it a try.
Yeah, you want
to
run that. Now, if the existing fuel is natural gas, then you might actually want to force and you're concerned about the energy cost, then you might actually want to force the gas system to come on at 30 degrees.
So Karen asks, are the rebate incentives restricted to income levels? I'll let you answer that by state and federal, because I think that's a different answer sometimes.
Yeah, so at the state level, I think the threshold is for income eligible is 60% of the average income in the state. You may, I don't have a good handle, and then moderate incomes above that. At the federal level, I don't know what the thresholds are. And again, I haven't had a great deal of time to look into those benefits. But one of the things I heard about those benefits is that overall, the Mass Save program in Massachusetts spends about $1 billion a year on incentives. The total amount available from the IRA is about 85 million. So it's less than 10% of the Mass Save program. And how Massachusetts chooses to spend those benefits from the IRA has some discretion, from what I understand. So,
but that's true that's money going to the state energy office. But the $2,000 tax credit for the IRA,
yeah, that one is a tax credit. Yeah, that one you can take to the bank.
Yeah,
when it becomes available, which I would expect would be for tax year 2023.
Yeah. So that Rewiring America, while the details are working out, that's the best thing we have right now. I put in the chat that you can put in your income level, what you're interested in, and based on what anybody's best guess of how this is going to work, it'll show you the incentives. The Mass Save incentives, you Google Mass Save, and maybe Ina can put it back in the chat, will show you the incentives for the heat pumps as well as insulation in Massachusetts. As Steve said, there are some differences depending on income levels. They are at the lowest income levels. There's some significant grants for heat pumps, and at moderate income in some communities, they're actually providing even richer incentives, and it does vary a little. So it's just hard to go through all that. And it's not those communities are not Wayland. They're sort of Western Mass.
So I see.
The question is, do you need to get heat pumps installed by certain installers to qualify for the Mass Save rebates?
Yes, and for the starting this year, no, but starting January 1st. And so if you're going out and getting quotes starting tomorrow, it's likely that your system might not be installed till 2023. But starting January 1st, the installation has to be done by an installer who is part of the Mass Save heat pump installer network. Those installers have gone through at least one employee of those installers has gone through some special additional training that Mass Save is providing. I wouldn't, you still want to rely on recommendations of good installers. Just being in the heat pump installer network might not be a sufficient qualification, but it's a necessary qualification if you want to get the Mass Save rebate.
All right, I'm going to ask Courtney and Gottfried who you use for your installation. You both used a bigger company, seemed happy, but you didn't say the name of the company. I think that's a reasonable question.
Sure. We used Rodenheiser, and
Same here.
you did too?
Yeah.
I would also say they were great in that they handled all this paperwork, all the rebates, we did one of those heat loans. And it was painless. I mean, they just did it. It all just magically happened. Checks arrived in our mailbox. It was very easy.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, no complaints.
Yeah, I would say in general, I review a lot of quotes for coaching clients, and the quotes have improved in terms of providing the information that's necessary to claim the Mass Save rebates. I don't have information on different installers. Most installers now who will handle the rebate for clients, and if they don't, if you have an installer who won't handle the rebate, that might be a reason not to proceed with them.
Right, those are the questions I see in the chat. Anybody else have a question? Steve, did we want to end at 8:30? And I want to take 2 minutes at the very end.
Yeah, I think if we've covered the questions and we've given resources, maybe just we're going to send out some follow-up email to the attendees, Ellen, and we
Yeah,
can
we will.
provide-
I'd love to share your slides. I'm trying to spell Rodenheiser, which, as you all know, I'm a terrible speller. So good.
Yeah, you
Thank
got it. Courtney's got it right. Yeah.
I will say there are lots of companies that can do this, and
Yeah.
it's always good to get multiple quotes. That said, we put in a hybrid system. I ended up also using Rodenheiser. I think they can be a little higher price, but they did a good job. We used a different plumber for our heat pump hot water system, and there was a big difference in price. And on that one, we were very happy going with our plumber. How do we request a coach? If you live in Wayland or a part of Congregation Bethel, there is you can go to Energize Wayland About Us and request a coach, and Ina has helpfully put the link to that directly in the chat if you are that. If your congregation, not in Wayland you're Bethel. If you're Bethel, you should email Steve. If you're a member of Bethel, you can get his email from the congregational directory. Plus, on the JCAN website, we might be listed, but I think you can find Steve's email. If you can't, just reach out to info@Energize Wayland, and I'll sort you out. If you're in Framingham, you need to go to the heatsmartalliance.org and see if there are coaches there. I know Framingham and Natick are hiring a coach together right now to help people on heat pumps and energy audits. So that may be coming online. And Framingham has a good sustainability manager, Sean. And we have Framingham has your Energize Framingham site. So I would reach out through Energize Framingham to Amy Pualka. If you just hit contact us, it will go to Amy and she can help you in Framingham. All right. Natick. They are hiring a new energy coach with Framingham, but you can reach out to the sustainability manager there, Beverly, on the website for Natick, Jillian Wilston Martin. Yep, I would reach out to Jillian. And there's also an Eco Natick website. Maybe Kat, you can put in the chat. And I don't know if Debbie has any resources from Eco Natick. Kat, do you know? Okay, great. She's on all of that. All right. Wow, we're doing great here. Such a group of people putting comments in there. But first of all, I want to start by saying thank you to Steve, Steve, I think we've done this together probably at least 6 times in person and on the web, and terrific job. And it's always incredibly informative. And I know for a lot of people, it's just a journey. It's like, I'm thinking about it. I think the more we share these experiences that we've had in our own homes to say, hey, this really, take the plunge, this really works. It's helpful, and to provide support to each other. So I want to thank Steve for helping coach me and so many others, and being on a continuous learning curve, so that always kind of thinking about how to do it better. So thank you very much, Steve. And to Courtney and Gottfried also for terrific. I've heard your testimonials before, and I find them really inspiring. So thanks for being at the cutting edge of this.
Happy to help, and thank you to Steve and all the coaches. I know it's a lot of work, but it helped me greatly and continues to do so. So thank you.
Same. Thank you so much.
So I want to end with just a final thing. I didn't actually totally get this ready ahead of time. So now that's the Rewiring America calculator. But just for those of you in Wayland, or if you're at Congregation Bethel, this kind of site will be hopefully familiar to you. And this is the Energize Wayland site. If you're in Wayland and you don't know us, energizewayland.org, please go on here. You can see we have goals to engage 1,000 households in Wayland to take climate action. We have a climate action mobilization plan with big goals. You can see today's event and upcoming events and all recordings to events. And if you go to actions, this is where you would sign in, create an account right here. Go to actions and tell us what you've done. So you can see, this is my profile. I've done a bunch of stuff, including most recently the heat pump hot water heater. If there's something you want to do, you could put it on your to-do list. And if you put heat pump hot water or green heating and cooling on your to-do list, we're going to keep track of that. And when we see interesting things happen, we're going to try and reach out to folks. So take a look at the actions. For every action, you can click on it and hear the description of it, steps to take, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, testimonials from people. And if you want to nerd out and learn more, put that on that is actually on our to-do list, and planning to do that in the next few years. This allows us to look at impact in Wayland and see what people are doing. And you are welcome to come on here to see not only households engaged, but what we've done as individuals and self-reports, and we also can pull in some state data. So this all helps us see how we're doing to getting our climate goals in Wayland, which is a 50% reduction in GHGs by 2030 and 100% by 2050. So please be on that journey with us. And the same is true if you're part of Congregation Bethel or any of the other communities I mentioned. You also have sites like this. If you have trouble finding them, you can reach out to us and we will help navigate you there. So I think with that, I can wrap us up for tonight. Unless Kat, I also want to, I forgot to thank Kat Van Straten, who without whom most of these things in Wayland would not happen. She was on vacation in Europe for 2 weeks to see family she hadn't seen in 5 years, and I realized how much I missed and relied on her, since it was up to me to get the word out on this one. So so thank you to Kat, who's running the tech on this and just is an integral piece of everything we do in Wayland on climate. All right. I think I'm scanning the messages. Great. We hope that you all take some action on this. And if you're in Wayland, stay tuned. Ann Harris is on the call, is leading, we'll be rolling out a big new campaign for everyone to get energy audits and home energy upgrades. Be looking for a letter in your mailbox in the next month from the town manager, and lots of banners. Those energy audits and coaches are going to be pointing out opportunities for heat pumps, solar, and also getting engaged in local climate work. So stay tuned for that in Wayland. Night, folks. Thank you
Night
very
all.
much.
Thanks for joining.